Draco Malfoy, and the year when everyone suddenly paid attention to him. But Draco will hear about this. Chapter 2. Maneuvering romances you don't have. With Harry's arrival at the burrow, Draco was a permanent fixture at the house for the rest of the summer holidays. Sure, he slept at Andromeda's and still spent an appropriate amount of time with his own family, but most afternoons he was to be found around the Weasleys' house hanging out with Harry, playing Quidditch with him, Weasley, and Ginny, or going over some new course material with Hermione. Despite the uneasy political climate, it were the most relaxed summer holidays Draco had ever spent. Of course, there were bad days. When they were all gathered for Harry's birthday, bad news flew in left and right of new Dementor attacks, as well as the discovery of Karkaroff's dead body. To say it put a downer on the day Miss Weasley had so carefully planned was an understatement. Draco also couldn't quite shake off the idea of the prophecy. It stayed with him constantly and resurfaced in the most inopportune moments, clawing at his heart in fear and making it hard to breathe for a moment. He did not voice this to Harry, naturally, but he thought that his friend still knew from the way he looked at him every now and again. In other news, Draco's relationship with Weasley was rockier than ever, which would have amused Draco if it wasn't so bloody annoying.
"Could you please make it clear to your Elphaba brother that you're dating Thomas, and not me?"
Draco complained to Ginny as Weasley had stormed off to hang out with Harry in the garden, but not without some thorough hostility in Draco's direction first.
"This is getting ridiculous."
"I told him," Ginny called, sounding despaired, "various times. It's not my fault if he doesn't believe me." "How did this even start?" Hermione inquired, sounding bewildered. "Does he really think you two can't be friends without anything happening?" "Maybe I can't be friends with any more without anything happening," Ginny countered, rolling her eyes. "It's straight out insulting."
"Not to mention that he's insinuating you can't take care of yourself by being nasty to me," Draco countered. "Imagine we were dating."
"Right!" Ginny nodded, sounding outraged. "Well, I'm certainly not surprised that you get along so well," Hermione snorted, amused at their behavior.
"Because we can commiserate about your brother being a git," Draco deadpanned. "It's definitely a common interest we share." What annoyed Draco most, though, was that Weasley apparently got into Harry's head, too, about the whole Ginny thing. So when one afternoon Harry asked Draco in attempted casualness whether Ginny and Draco were dating, Draco snapped.
"For Merlin's sake!" he groaned. "For the last time, I'm not dating her! Weasley has to get out of his arse about me being friends with his sister and get a life!"
Harry just looked at him and bit his lips, seeming not quite sure what to say in response to that, so Draco supplied, "She's with Dean Thomas, as she informed you all on the Hogwarts Express a couple of weeks ago. Were you obliviated?"
"No,"
Harry frowned, a small smile on his lips.
"It's just you seem to get along so well, and Ron said, never mind, if you don't, it's all good."
"Why?" Draco frowned, scanning his face now. "Would it have been a problem if I had been dating Ginny?"
"No,"
Harry said too quickly.
"just saying."
"You don't like Ginny, do you?"
Draco asked, suspicious and slightly annoyed.
"Because she is with Thomas."
"Don't be ridiculous, Ron went out of my head."
"So that's what this is about? Weasley's ridiculous sister complex?"
"No, I was just asking, Draco, don't bite my head off, blimey."
Harry was grumbling to himself now, and there was a slight flush on his face, so Draco reluctantly let it pass, still frowning. As their annual letters from Hogwarts containing their book lists arrived, the envelopes also contained a little surprise for both Draco and Harry. Both of them were named Quidditch captains of their respective house teams, causing them to break out in a good-natured banter about who was going to lead their team to win the house championship this time around. The arrival of their letters also prompted their families to schedule a trip to Diagon Alley, though something they had all collectively avoided until that point. The wizarding shopping area had become something like a hot plaster over the summer, seeing that a lot of respectable stores had been pillaged. Both Florian Fortescue and Ollivander were gone, and their shops stood abandoned. Especially in the latter case, this was disastrous for the society at large. Ollivander's was, after all, the most renowned wand maker in Britain, and wands were a wizard's basic need, particularly with the war on the horizon. So they traveled to Diagon Alley in a group and by means of security guards, which they were only able to obtain because of Harry's presence among them. They met up with Hagrid as additional security detail at the Leaky Cauldron, and the teenagers all split from the adults to go to Madame Malkin's for new robes, while the adults browsed for their school books at Flourish and Blotts. They got up with them again when they were done to buy potion ingredients and pet treats before they headed for Fred and George's shop. Compared to the rest of Diagon Alley, the twins' establishment was bursting both with color and activity. The shop was literally bursting with customers of all ages, and as Draco followed his friends to browse the articles on display, he was impressed to see that the twins had expanded from their initial joke product line and were now offering quite a broad range of products. Ginny and Draco were just hovering over a selection of what appeared to be legitimate love potions, wondering how effective they really were, when the developers in question swooped up behind them, taking the little bottle from their fingers. "Of course they work!" Fred told them in mock offense, as if they had insulted his professional pride. "For up to 24 hours at a time, depending on the weight of the boy in question and the attractiveness of the girl," completed George, before looking back and forth between them, eyes narrowing. "But we're not selling them to our sister," he added sternly. "Not when she's already got about 5 boys on the go from what we've—"
"Whatever you've heard from Ron is a big fat lie,"
Ginny said calmly, while Draco tried hard not to implode in exasperation. Ginny, meanwhile, looked at a little pink pot.
"What's this?"
"Guaranteed 10-second pimple vanisher," said Fred. "Excellent on everything from boils to blackheads, but don't change the subject. Are you or are you not currently dating that dashing young gentleman next to you?"
"No!"
Draco burst out indignantly.
"She is not!" "There you have it," Ginny smiled. "I am not. Serve you right for listening to Ron. Now what are those?"
She had turned to look at a shelf of what appeared to be miniature puffskins, a smile spreading over her face. "Pygmy puffs," George said. "Can't breed them fast enough. So what about Dean Thomas?"
"Him I am dating, and last time I looked, he was definitely 1 boy, not 5.
Ginny was now poking a finger into the cage to interact with the nearest puffs.
"They're really cute."
"They're fairly cuddly, yes," conceded Fred. "But what about Michael Corner?"
"I dumped him. He was a bad loser."
"But you're moving through boyfriends a bit fast, aren't you?" It was all Draco could do not to roll his eyes. Godric and Salazar. He thought it was only Weasley, but apparently it was the whole Zadig family. He felt for poor Jenny. Being a girl in this family must suck. As if Draco's sentiments were resonating inside Jenny, she was getting to her feet and facing her brothers, her face so full of anger that it cried murder, and Draco took that as his cue to leave. He found Harry, Hermione, and Weasley in another corner of the store, Weasley loading his arms with products like a madman, and Draco glared at him. "Thanks for siccing your brothers on me," Draco snapped. "When will you get it through your thick skull that I am not snogging your sister?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Weasley said, not looking at him, but the red tips of his ears gave him away. "Yeah, sure," Draco snorted, turning to Harry. "So this shop is quite something, huh?" "It is," Harry agreed with a smile. "They really pulled something together." "I would say it's especially impressive considering the current climate, but I dare say it might be the political crisis that helped their success," Draco mused. "After all, people long to laugh with all the misery around."
"You might be right with that," Hermione agreed. "Though really, this is much more than a joke shop. They've got so much randomly useful stuff in here. It's quite impressive."
"I agree," Draco nodded. "It might be listed as a joke shop, but it actually resembles a department store on Pepper Up Potion." Harry laughed at that, flashing him a grin, and Draco found his shoulder clasp from behind. "I quite like that description," Fred noted, seeming much more affectionate with Draco now that he had realized that he wasn't trying to get into his baby sister's pants. "Cheers, Draco." "You're welcome," Draco grinned. "And that's 3 galleons, 9 sickles, and a nut," he told Weasley, eyeing him suspiciously and stretching out a hand. "Cough up!" "I'm your brother," Weasley spluttered indignant. "And that's our stuff you're nicking. 3 galleons, 9 sickles. I'll knock off the nut." Draco grinned and watched in satisfaction as Weasley argued with his brother, feeling that for the way he'd set him off to be mauled earlier, he deserved no less. For the first time since he'd started Hogwarts, Draco wished the summer holidays could have gone on a little longer, but unfortunately they had to return to Hogwarts eventually. So on September 1st, they made their way to King's Cross, separately this time, since Harry and the Weasleys were accompanied by Orbers again, and Draco porkied with his mother. Harry seemed very harried when Draco finally caught sight of him at the platform barely on time for the train, and once they had said their goodbyes and jumped on, he was grumpily trying to direct them to an empty compartment, fully forgetting about his friend's prefect duties. So when Hermione, Weasley, and Draco excused themselves to the prefect compartment first, his expression was sour, and Draco felt unreasonably guilty. They found him later in a compartment with Longbottom and Luna, seeming only slightly mollified by their presence, but they had barely sat down when a third-year girl came sweeping in to hand both Harry and Longbottom a note from none other than the dubious Professor Slughorn, who was asking them to meet him in his compartment for lunch. It was Draco's turn to be in a sour mood after the two of them had clambered off. The thought that some weird teacher would be trying to smarm around Harry all year made him feel empty. Dumbledore had wanted Slughorn around, so most probably he could be trusted, but that did not mean Draco had to like people siphoning off Harry's attention because of his fame. Draco's little sulk, only occasionally interrupted by Luna trying to clean his aura from wax spurts, came to an abrupt halt when Lavender Brown and Parvati Patil stepped into the compartment, taking Harry and Longbottom's empty seats, which was a really odd thing to happen and caused the rest of them to exchange curious glances. Because, yes, Brown and Patil had been members of the DA, so they were not in enemy territory, but they were not exactly friends either. But then Brown turned to Weasley, her cheeks flushed and her eyes wide, as she asked how his holidays had been, and Draco thought, "Oh, that's how it is." Draco was unable to observe Weasley's reaction, though he would have really loved to see it, for it was sure to be legendary, because at that moment Patil turned upon him, a bright smile on her face, and Draco froze.
"Draco," she said, "it's good to see you again. I hope things have been alright for you at home. I have been worried after what happened this summer with your father."
Draco said rather eloquently. Words were difficult to come by as Patil kept staring at him, dark eyes focused entirely on him. "It was okay?"
"I'm glad,"
she said, and then she reached out from where she was seated across from him, finding his knee. Draco stiffened.
"It must have been tough."
Draco did not answer. He wondered if he could move his knee away without seeming overly rude. Then again, Patil was the one suddenly crossing personal boundaries, wasn't she? And that was the moment the door opened again and Harry and Longbottom returned. Draco twitched, his knee jerking sideways and making Patil's hand fall away from it, but the damage was done. Harry had obviously seen it resting there, and he had frozen in his movements, eyes glued to where the connection between them had been. Suddenly, Draco felt extremely embarrassed and even guilty, like he'd been caught doing something forbidden, which was rather ridiculous. Harry was still staring.
"Harry, Neville,"
Luna greeted them cheerfully. "How was your body?" Harry cut her off, his voice ice, and Draco's eyes widened at the tone. "You're in my seat."
"Oh, am I?"
She giggled, getting to her feet.
"Sorry about that. I was just having a chat with Draco."
She tapped Brown, who followed her friend reluctantly, seeming unwilling to pull herself away from Weasley. Only when they were gone did Harry fall into the seat Patil had abandoned, jaw tight, obviously in a spectacularly bad mood. A tensed silence followed the departure of the two girls, and it took Draco a moment to realize that Hermione, too, was looking out of the window, distinctly unhappy.
"So,"
Luna offered, seemingly immune to the rigidity around her.
"Exploding snap?"
Only after a few games did Harry relax a little, enough at least to moodily bitch about their new teacher's favoritism and all the snobby rich kids he'd invited into the compartment to network with. "It was horrible," he shuddered. "I'll never go again." "Probably better," Draco agreed, a little relieved at Harry's lack of enthusiasm. "Who knows what motives he might have? Better to stay as far away as possible." Harry only hummed, not meeting his eyes. Draco frowned, a little thrown by the silent treatment, and more than relieved when they got off the train at Hogsmeade just to get a breather from Harry's horrible mood. The Slytherin table, Draco noted, was more subdued than it had ever been before. Instead of sharing space in large, obnoxious clutters, the way they usually did upon returning from months apart, they sat in small, separate groups that kept their distance from each other and their heads down. Conversations were held in hushed voices, and suspicious eyes wandered occasionally. Draco took a seat near Pansy Parkinson and Blazy Beanie and observed his housemates, wondering how many of their parents were directly or indirectly involved with the Dark Lord, and how many of them were sitting at this table like he did, discussing the exact same question. When Dumbledore got to his feet after dinner to give his speech, it felt like hours had passed. Time seemed to be running extra slow tonight, and Draco wished the headmaster would just hurry up and send them off to bed already so he could just put an end to this bloody awkward day. But then the hushed murmurs ran through the hall, and Draco looked up to determine the cause of it. His eyes quickly landed on Dumbledore's blackened hand, which he had raised in a gesture of welcome as he had started his speech. Draco frowned, looking over at the Gryffindor table for clues, but Harry was whispering to Hermione and Weasley, not glancing in his direction.
Nothing to worry about,
Dumbledore said casually, noticing the disruption the sight of his injury had caused.
Now, to our new students, welcome. To our old students, welcome back.
As he launched into his usual speech, Draco frowned at their headmaster, observing his hand. It looked like he had been hit by some sort of curse. Draco had done enough reading to recognize the signs dark magic could leave, and this did not look as harmless as Dumbledore was trying to make it seem. He could just hope that the headmaster had found some way to contain whatever he had been hit with, and was now working on breaking it.
And Mr. Felt, our caretaker, has asked me to say that there is a blanket ban on any joke items bought at the shop called Weasley's Wizard Wheezes.
Draco, despite himself, had to bite down on a smile as he tuned back into the speech and glanced at Filch, standing near the entrance door with Miss Norris in his arms, looking grim. As if he'd managed to keep Fred and George's products out of Hogwarts. That was a fight he'd lost before he'd even begun it.
Those wishing to play for the house Quidditch teams should give their names to the heads of house as usual. We are also looking for new Quidditch commentators who should do likewise. We are pleased to welcome a new member of staff this year, Professor Slughorn.
A chubby, bald old man got to his feet at the staff table, smiling into the round.
Is a former colleague of mine who has agreed to resume his own post as Potions Master.
Draco's mouth dropped as he stared. Various students voiced his incredulity. Potions?
Potions?
Professor Snape, meanwhile,
The headmaster continued, raising his voice to be heard above the uproar among the students,
will be taking over the position of Defense Against the Dark Art teacher. No!
Draco could hear a loud exclaim from the Gryffindor table, and he would have put down a lot of galleons that had come from Harry. Draco could not exactly blame him. DADA was Harry's best subject by far, and with Snape teaching it, it would become his personal nightmare. The students broke into discussions because it had been an open secret that Snape had been angling for the job as DADA teacher for years, but Dumbledore had never seen it fit to appoint him. Now this had obviously changed. Draco wondered what had been the motivating factor in his decision. Dumbledore cleared his throat, and slowly the voices died down. Only when everyone was silent and the complete attention had returned to the headmaster did Dumbledore continue speaking.
Now, as everybody in this hall knows, Lord Voldemort and his followers are once more at large and gaining strength.
Draco's heart hammered in his chest as he chanced to glance down the table at where he knew not was seated, flanked by his usual entourage of Crabbe and Goyle. He was staring blankly into space, his face grave.
I cannot emphasize strongly enough how dangerous the present situation is,
Dumbledore continued,
and how much care each of us at Hogwarts must take to ensure that we remain safe. The castle's magical fortifications have been strengthened over the summer. We are protected in new and more powerful ways, but we must still guard scrupulously against carelessness on the part of any student or member of staff. I urge you, therefore, to abide by any security restrictions that your teachers might impose upon you, however irksome you might find them. In particular, the rule that you are not to be out of bed after hours.
At that, Draco flashed a glance over at the Gryffindor table towards Harry, who was a likely candidate to break that particular rule.
I implore you, should you notice anything strange or suspicious within or outside the castle, to report it to a member of the staff, immediately. I trust you to conduct yourselves always with the utmost regard for your own and each other's safety.
Dumbledore took a moment to let his words sink in, and his eyes traced the faces of the students seated across the hall before he concluded his speech with,
But now your beds await, as warm and comfortable as you could possibly wish, and I know that your top priority is to be well rested for your lessons tomorrow. Let us therefore say good night. Pip pip.
The students started to get to their feet and began filing out of the hall, their conversations subdued. Draco hurried to get through the crowds to fulfill his duty as prefect, and when he finally arrived at his dormitory about half an hour later, all his roommates were already present, lounging on their beds. Draco braced himself for not to pick a fight. After all, they had not parted on good terms last year, with Not's father having gone to Azkaban along with his, and the summer holidays must have done nothing to assuage his temper. But much to his surprise, Not merely threw him a seething glare and returned to the book he was reading, not paying him any more mind. To be honest, Draco was relieved. He had better things to do than deal with Not's temper tantrums this school year. So Draco quickly changed into his pajamas before reaching for his enchanted parchment, which had already turned golden in notification of a message, and unrolled it.
Bloody Snape, it read in Harry's messy scrawl, and Draco couldn't help but smile.
So you had no clue he was supposed to teach potions?
He replied.
No,
Came the immediate answer.
I thought he was going to take the DA position, obviously. I cannot believe Dumbledore did this.
Well, it's going to be an interesting year, to put it mildly.
It's going to be hell. DADA is going to be hell. Snape is going to make my life miserable.
You just mustn't let him, Harry. Don't give him an opportunity to show you up. You're a star in DADA. Show a solid performance with your knowledge, and there's nothing Snape can do.
You know Snape. He'll find a way to make me look like a bloody idiot.
Secretly, Draco knew he was right,
but saying so would have been incredibly tactless. So instead he wrote,
This might be a good thing. With a decent teacher, you might do well in potions for a change, and he can't mess up your performance in DADA so much that you fail. It's a win-win if you ask me.
If you're trying to cheer me up, it's not working.
Well, it was worth the attempt. So what happened to Dumbledore's hand?
I've no idea. He didn't tell me when I asked him this summer. It looks dead, doesn't it?
It was hit with a curse of some sort, I think. I wonder what happened.
Me too.
There was a pause, and then Harry added a promise of nothing.
How has Not been? Is he giving you a hard time?
He's quiet,
Draco told him truthfully.
very subdued.
Well, good. He'd better not touch you.
Draco smiled at the protective fierceness in Harry's words, but before he could answer, Harry followed them up with,
Okay, kid, I'm beat. See you tomorrow. Good night.
Good night,
Draco answered.
sleep well.
You too.
Draco allowed himself a couple of moments to longingly stare at the words, feeling them like a caress, before rolling up the parchment and putting them away carefully. Then he tucked himself in and closed the curtains, falling quickly into an easy sleep.